Everything you're seeing right now may be the exact reason nothing in your life has truly changed. Not your habits, not your mindset, not your discipline, but the evidence sitting directly in front of your eyes. I know that sounds strange at first, almost uncomfortable to hear, but deep down you've probably already felt this without ever being able to explain it. The harder you try to force your reality to change, the more reality seems to tighten around the same patterns. You wake up and the bills are still there waiting for you. Your body still hurts in the exact same places. Your bank account still answers you with the same number it answered you with last month, last year, maybe even 3 years ago. And at night, when everything gets quiet, the ceiling above your bed looks exactly the same as it did during all those nights you promised yourself your life would eventually become different. Somewhere behind your eyes, there's a tiredness sleep can't touch. A kind of exhaustion no doctor can diagnose because it isn't physical. It hides in the pause before you answer when someone asks how you're doing. And over time, you've gotten so used to hiding it that the lie comes out automatically. I'm good, just busy. The words sound smooth because you've repeated them so many times they no longer feel like words at all. But underneath that performance, something inside you remembers. It remembers the version of you who truly believed life would have changed by now. It remembers the desires you carried at 25, at 30, at 38. The years keep moving, but the longing stays exactly where it was. And eventually, there comes a very specific kind of silence. The silence that appears when you realize you've been telling yourself the same story about your future for longer than you want to admit. Waiting for the call, waiting for the opportunity, waiting for the day your real life finally arrives and introduces itself to you. And I need you to hear this carefully because it changes everything. You may have been doing everything right, and that may be exactly why nothing worked. Maybe you already studied Neville. Maybe you sat in the morning listening to Joe Dispenza. Maybe you whispered affirmations into the bathroom mirror while trying to convince yourself they were true. Maybe you built vision boards, tore them down, then built new ones again, hoping this time reality would finally respond. But every single time you looked up from the practice and saw the same world staring back at you unchanged, something inside you became quieter, more exhausted, more suspicious. A part of you started wondering if all of this was just a beautiful story told by people who happened to get lucky. But here's the strange part. That doubt was never the problem. That doubt was the doorway. Because what I'm about to tell you is not another method, not another morning ritual, not another technique for you to stack on top of all the others you already tried and abandoned in silence. It's something much simpler and much harder. Your reality is not refusing to change because you don't want it badly enough. It's not because you can't visualize clearly enough. It's not because you're unworthy. The real reason is hidden inside one contradiction so strange that most people reject it the first time they hear it. You will never receive what you want by staring at what you already have. And the moment you begin understanding why, the moment you stop treating your eyes as if they're telling you the final truth, something begins to crack open. Not in your circumstances at first, in the place where reality itself is being created. Because right now, while you're listening to this, two worlds are operating at the exact same time. One world you can touch. You can photograph it, measure it. It's the world of your alarm clock, your reflection in the mirror, the weight of your keys in your pocket. But there's another world running underneath this one. A world you cannot see, cannot measure, cannot prove to anyone who hasn't already felt it. And yet it's the place where everything you've ever wanted already exists, already breathes, already belongs to you. This is not poetry. This is the architecture behind how the invisible becomes visible. Ancient mystics tried to describe this for thousands of years, and people dismissed them as dreamers. Then physics approached the same territory from another direction and called it the quantum field. Different language, same truth. Every physical thing existed somewhere unseen before it became material. The chair beneath you existed in someone's imagination before it existed in wood. The phone in your hand existed first inside the minds of engineers before it became glass and metal. Even the relationship you're in existed first inside two imaginations before it became two physical people standing in front of each other. Nothing enters the visible world without first passing through the invisible. And this is where it becomes uncomfortable. Because if that's true, then the life you're living right now, the one frustrating you, the one you're desperately trying to escape, also began invisibly first. At some quiet moment you never noticed, it was thought, felt, believed, and eventually printed into form. What you're looking at when you look at your current life is not your life itself. It's the receipt. The transaction already happened long ago. The product is only arriving now. And this is the part that gently breaks people the first time they truly understand it, because we were trained to emotionally react to the receipt. We see the number in the bank account and immediately feel fear. We see the empty chair and feel abandoned. We look in the mirror and feel shame. Then we take those emotional reactions to what has already happened and use them to place another order carrying the exact same emotional signature. And afterward we wait, hoping for a different result. But it never comes. It can't. Reality doesn't work that way. The third dimension, the world of objects, bodies, money, circumstances, is downstream. It is the mouth of the river, not the source. You can stand at the mouth of the river screaming at the water all day long and nothing will change because the water is coming from somewhere else. And this is exactly what most people are doing with their lives. They stand at the edge of their relationships, trying to fight water that already arrived. They stand at the edge of their finances arguing with currents that left the source weeks ago. They use effort, willpower, endless late-night reading, trying desperately to push against outcomes that already received their instructions long before they appeared. But the water cannot listen now. The instructions were written upstream in a place most people never think to visit. So if you want different water, you do not fight the river. You walk upstream. You walk beyond the arguments, beyond the rocks that shaped your conclusions, beyond the noise of the current. You keep walking until the water becomes quieter, until you can hear it before it even becomes a river. And eventually, if you go far enough, you arrive at the place where the water is still deciding what it will become. That place is inside you. It has always been inside you. And the strange tragedy is that most people will spend their entire lives standing at the mouth of the river, shouting at water that was poured there by a younger version of themselves so long ago they no longer even remember creating it. And that invisible place, the one ancient traditions once called the fourth dimension, is what modern physics now circles carefully through the language of the quantum field. Not a fantasy above the clouds. Not some poetic metaphor people use to feel hopeful. A real layer of reality where every possible version of your life already exists as potential waiting to become visible. Every conversation you haven't had yet, every embrace that hasn't happened, every opportunity, every check, every future version of yourself you've been trying to reach, none of them are coming. They already exist. They're waiting for you to align with the right inner frequency so they can move from possibility into form. And the only thing keeping most people trapped for their entire lives is painfully simple. They keep using their senses to decide what is real. They walk into a room searching for evidence. Their eyes scan for confirmation. Their ears listen for proof. Their nervous system records every detail as if the physical world is the final authority. But your senses were never designed to tell you the truth. They were designed to keep you alive inside the third dimension. Their job is to monitor the printout, not write. The next page. The moment you mistake your senses for reality itself, you become nothing more than a reader trapped inside a story you forgot you were writing. Every day you read the same emotional chapter back to yourself, wondering why life never moves forward. But the story cannot change until you finally put the book down and remember that you are the one holding the pen. And the pen is not effort. It is not willpower. It is not 10,000 affirmations repeated until your throat goes numb. The pen is your inner state. The deeper place beneath thought, beneath mood, beneath reaction. The quiet place inside you that already knows who you are beyond the performance you've been carrying for too long. And this is where most people become uncomfortable because the moment they hear this, they immediately want a technique. They want someone to tell them exactly what to say, how long to visualize, what hour of the morning works best. I understand that hunger because I carried it too. I spent years collecting methods the way some people collect books they never actually read. But eventually I realized the technique was never the obstacle. The obstacle was that deep down, I still believed the visible world was more real than the invisible one. I treated the unseen like a backup plan. Like a hopeful experiment I would test for a few weeks just to see if it worked. But the invisible world does not respond to testing. It responds to devotion. Not religious devotion. Not blind belief in something outside yourself. The kind of devotion that asks you to stop pretending the outer world is more real than the world inside your own consciousness. The kind that asks you to understand in your bones that what you see is the slowest moving reflection of who you have been, while what you feel inside you right now is the fastest signal of what is already approaching. And almost everyone who walks this path eventually crashes into the same wall. Usually late at night. You've been visualizing, holding the feeling, protecting your state. Then suddenly something happens during the day. A bill arrives. A conversation falls apart. A number on a screen drops. And within seconds the certainty you felt that morning disappears from your body like smoke. The vision becomes blurry. The feeling goes cold. By noon you can barely remember the clarity you woke up with at sunrise. Then the shame arrives. Quiet. Internal. Heavy. You start telling yourself you're not disciplined enough. Not spiritual enough. Not advanced enough. But none of that is true. What's happening is not a discipline problem. It's a definition problem. You've been defining reality by what your senses report back to you. So every time your senses show you something that contradicts your inner state, you treat it like evidence against yourself. But here's what nobody tells you. Your senses do not vote. They report. There's a difference. A weather reporter describing a storm does not create the storm. The storm formed long before the forecast appeared on the screen. It formed in invisible pressure systems, deep ocean temperatures, currents no human eye could fully see. And by the time the wind finally reaches your window, the storm was already decided days earlier somewhere far beyond your sight. The person standing in their backyard watching the trees bend thinks the wind began there. But it didn't. It began 1,000 miles away in silence while they were asleep. And this is the part that humbles you once you truly sit with it. Because almost everything that arrives in your life feels sudden. The diagnosis feels sudden. The breakup feels sudden. The opportunity feels sudden. The money arriving finally feels sudden. But nothing is sudden. Nothing ever was. Everything appearing in your visible reality had already been forming quietly long before you saw the first sign of it. It formed in the conversations you had with yourself in the shower, in the assumptions you repeated about what was possible for someone like you, in the way you carried your body when nobody was watching. That was the weather system being built. Not in the sky, inside you. Your senses are only reporting on conditions created somewhere deeper. And that deeper place, the actual pressure system of your life, exists inside that invisible field of possibility we keep circling around. The space where countless versions of you still remain unprinted. And every single time you allow visible evidence to destroy your inner state, you let the forecast control the weather. You let the report rewrite the story instead of letting the story create the report. Once you truly see this, you start noticing how often you've been doing it. You check your bank account, and your entire nervous system reorganizes itself around a number. Your shoulders collapse. Your jaw tightens. Your breathing changes. And in that moment, without realizing it, you place another order upstream. You send another emotional broadcast into the invisible world saying, "This is who I am. This is what is true. Send me more of this." And the invisible world, which holds no opinion about whether something is good or bad for you, simply reflects the signal back faithfully. This is the loop most people are trapped inside. They believe they're reacting to reality when they are actually recreating it. Every emotional reaction to a circumstance becomes the blueprint for the next circumstance. Every collapse in front of evidence renews the contract that produced the evidence in the first place. The circumstance itself did not create your feeling. Your interpretation did. And your feeling becomes the seed of the next experience. Your mind will resist this idea because your entire identity was built around believing the world causes your emotions. But the world does not make you feel anything. Your relationship to the world creates every feeling you experience. And your relationship to reality is the only thing you truly control. This is where the real work begins. Not by changing what you see, but by changing what you do with what you see. Because ignoring reality does not mean pretending it doesn't exist. It is not denial. It is not spiritual escape. Ignoring reality means refusing to let the report determine the source. It means seeing the bill without collapsing into the version of yourself who has no money. Seeing the empty chair without collapsing into loneliness. Seeing silence without collapsing into abandonment. You see the evidence. You acknowledge it. Then deliberately turn your attention away from the receipt, and back toward the source. Ancient traditions once called this faith. But faith was never blind belief. Faith was always the practice of treating the unseen as more real than the seen. Not as morality, as technology. They understood something modern people forgot. Reality reorganizes itself around whatever you treat as primary. Treat the visible world as primary, and you'll spend your life rearranging surfaces. Treat the invisible as primary, and the visible world slowly begins rearranging itself around you. I've watched this happen in my own life slowly. Painfully slowly sometimes, during the years it took me to stop arguing with what was in front of me. Because that's what most people are doing every day. Arguing with their body. Arguing with their partner. Arguing with their parents. Arguing with the years that already passed. But every argument is a vote. Every argument declares that what you're seeing deserves to control your state. And the moment you stop arguing, something strange happens. Not because you gave up, but because you became quiet enough to hear another channel underneath the noise. A quieter signal that has always been broadcasting beneath the surface. The channel your senses could never access. The channel where the life you've been reaching for has quietly been reaching back toward you this entire time, waiting for you to stop staring at the old receipt long enough to receive the next delivery. The hardest part about all of this is that the visible world is loud, not because it's more powerful than the invisible, but because you were trained from childhood to treat it as more important. You were taught to trust what could be touched, counted, measured, approved by other people. The grade on the paper mattered more than how you felt while learning. The number in the bank account mattered more than the state of your inner world. The expression on someone's face mattered more than the intuition quietly whispering underneath your fear. So by the time most people become adults, their entire nervous system has been conditioned to obey visible evidence automatically. A phone doesn't ring, and the body instantly feels rejection. A number drops, and the chest tightens. Someone walks away, and the mind immediately creates a future where you're abandoned forever. It happens so fast most people never even notice the sequence. They think the world caused the feeling directly, but the truth is subtler than that. The world triggered an interpretation, and the interpretation created the feeling. And once the feeling appears, the body begins broadcasting that emotional signature back into the invisible field again. This is why the same patterns repeat across years, even when circumstances change on the surface. Different city, different partner, different apartment, same emotional atmosphere underneath all of it. Because the visible world is not the source. It's the echo. But most people spend their entire lives screaming at echoes. And the strange thing about echoes is that the louder you scream at them, the louder they bounce back. This is why forcing reality rarely works for long. You can temporarily override your emotional state through motivation, adrenaline, or discipline, but eventually the deeper identity underneath pulls you back toward what feels familiar. Someone finally receives money but still feels unsafe, so they unconsciously recreate scarcity. Someone finally experiences love but still carries abandonment inside their body, so they begin sabotaging connection the moment it becomes real. Someone receives an opportunity they once prayed for, but because their nervous system is still organized around fear and limitation, they shrink in front of the very thing they thought they wanted. This is why changing the outer world without changing the inner relationship to yourself creates temporary results at best. The old emotional architecture quietly rebuilds the same life from underneath. And this is where people often misunderstand what ignoring reality actually means. It does not mean pretending problems don't exist. It does not mean lying to yourself while secretly panicking underneath affirmations. It means refusing to emotionally worship what has already been printed. It means understanding that visible evidence is delayed evidence. The physical world moves slowly, much slower than thought, much slower than feeling, much slower than identity. Reality is like light from a distant star. By the time you finally see it, what created it happened long ago somewhere far away from your eyes. Most people are emotionally reacting to old news while unknowingly generating tomorrow at the same time. And once you truly understand this, something begins changing in the way you move through daily life. You stop allowing every small external fluctuation to rewrite your state. You stop treating temporary conditions as permanent conclusions. A difficult morning no longer means your future is collapsing. A silent phone no longer means you're unwanted. A number in an account no longer defines your worth. You begin seeing visible reality for what it actually is, a delayed mirror reflecting previous assumptions, previous emotional patterns, previous versions of self. And because of that, you stop needing immediate proof in order to remain internally aligned. This is the point where manifestation stops feeling like fantasy and starts feeling like emotional maturity. Because now you're no longer asking the world for permission to become who you already decided to be. You're no longer waiting for external confirmation before allowing yourself to feel secure, loved, abundant, chosen, peaceful, worthy. You begin embodying the state first and allowing reality to reorganize afterward. But this is exactly where most people quit. They can hold the state for a few hours, maybe even a few days. Then suddenly nothing changes externally and panic returns. The mind immediately asks the old question, what if this isn't working? And the moment that fear enters, attention collapses back into visible evidence again. The person checks the bank account another 10 times, rereads old messages, studies the absence, watches the empty doorway, and without realizing it, they emotionally reconnect to the exact identity they were trying to leave behind. This is why the period between inner change and outer evidence feels so uncomfortable. Because there's always a gap, a space where your internal reality has shifted, but the visible world has not fully caught up yet. And that gap tests everything. It tests whether you truly understand the process or whether you were only trying to manipulate reality for emotional relief. Think about planting a seed underground. The moment you place it into the soil, nothing visible happens at first. Days pass, sometimes weeks. If someone didn't understand how growth works, they would assume nothing was happening beneath the surface. But beneath the darkness, life is already reorganizing itself invisibly. Roots are forming before anything breaks through the soil. The unseen always happens first. Yet most people keep emotionally digging the seed back up every few hours to check whether it's growing. They panic because they can't see movement yet. But constant doubt interrupts the very emotional coherence required for growth to stabilize. This is why patience matters so deeply in this work. Not passive waiting. Internal steadiness. The ability to remain connected to the unseen long enough for the visible world to catch up. And this is where something powerful begins emerging. You stop living as someone desperately trying to get something from reality and start living as someone allowing reality to reveal what already belongs to them. There's a completely different emotional frequency in those two states. One chases, one receives, one begs for evidence. The other understands evidence arrives last. And eventually, after enough moments of refusing to collapse in front of appearances, your nervous system begins learning a new way of existing. The body stops treating uncertainty like danger. Silence stops feeling like rejection. Delays stop feeling like punishment. You begin realizing that the invisible world was never withholding from you. It was waiting for your inner state to become stable enough to hold what you were asking for. Because receiving isn't just about attracting something once. It's about becoming the version of yourself capable of sustaining it without fear pulling you back into old patterns. And maybe this is the deepest shift of all, realizing that reality was never something happening to you. It has always been something responding through you. Most people think transformation happens when something outside of them finally changes. The relationship arrives. The money appears. The opportunity opens. The diagnosis disappears. They imagine that once the external world shifts, then peace will naturally follow. But the deeper truth is almost the opposite. Real change begins the moment you stop waiting for reality to give you permission to become someone new. Because the version of you that created the old life cannot fully enter the new one while still emotionally depending on old evidence. This is why so many people unknowingly live in contradiction. They spend 20 minutes in the morning visualizing abundance, love, peace, freedom, then spend the next 15 hours emotionally identifying with fear, lack, resentment, comparison, and survival. They send one signal during meditation and a completely different signal while standing in line at the grocery store. One version of them whispers possibility, the other keeps broadcasting limitation all day long. And then they wonder why reality feels mixed, delayed, unstable. But the invisible world isn't confused. It's responding faithfully to the dominant emotional atmosphere you continuously return to. Reality does not reorganize itself around your strongest moment. It reorganizes itself around your most repeated state. This is why emotional coherence matters so deeply. Not perfection, consistency. The ability to stop abandoning your inner state every time external conditions fluctuate. Most people think embodiment means acting confident for a few minutes. But embodiment is much quieter than performance. It's who you become when nobody is watching. It's the version of you that exists while washing dishes, driving alone at night, answering emails, sitting in silence before sleep. That's the state reality is actually listening to, not the temporary emotional high, the baseline identity underneath it. And this realization changes everything because it means the work is no longer about manifesting harder. It becomes about becoming internally unified, no longer sending opposing instructions into the field every few hours. No longer saying, "I trust life," while emotionally preparing for disaster underneath the sentence. No longer visualizing love while secretly rehearsing abandonment in private. Because the body cannot hold two identities forever without eventually collapsing from exhaustion. At some point, one emotional reality becomes stronger than the other. And whichever state you repeatedly nourish with attention, feeling, and inner conversation eventually becomes the atmosphere your life grows around. This is why the process often feels painful before it feels peaceful. Because when you stop reacting automatically to visible evidence, old emotional patterns begin surfacing with incredible intensity. Fear rises, doubt rises, memories rise. The body almost panics because the familiar survival identity realizes it's losing control. Most people assume this means they're failing. But in truth, it usually means the deeper rewiring has finally begun. Think about someone learning to walk again after years of moving a certain way. The old muscles resist. The body shakes. Everything feels unnatural at first. Not because the new movement is wrong, but because the nervous system has spent years memorizing a different pattern. Your emotional identity works the same way. The moment you stop emotionally obeying the old reality, the old self begins fighting for survival. It whispers things like, "This is pointless. Nothing is changing. You're lying to yourself. Look around. Be realistic." And because those thoughts sound familiar, many people unconsciously surrender to them before the new state has time to stabilize. But familiarity is not truth. Familiarity is just repetition. The old identity feels convincing because you practiced it for years. You rehearsed disappointment so many times your body learned to expect it automatically. You rehearsed rejection until your nervous system prepared for it before it even arrived. You rehearsed scarcity until abundance started feeling emotionally unsafe. This is why awakening can feel strangely lonely at first, because you begin noticing how often the world around you reinforces the old emotional program. Conversations built entirely around fear. Families emotionally addicted to stress. Social systems feeding comparison and panic. Every hour, entire cultures training people to measure themselves by visible achievement while remaining disconnected from themselves internally. And once you start seeing it, you cannot completely unsee it anymore. You begin realizing how many people are walking around emotionally hypnotized by appearances. They react instantly to every headline, every number, every expression on someone's face, without ever questioning the internal state those reactions are strengthening. But slowly, very slowly, something inside you begins changing. Not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because your relationship to the world becomes different. You stop needing every circumstance to immediately validate you emotionally. You stop collapsing every time uncertainty appears. You stop worshiping temporary appearances as permanent truth. And in that space, a deeper kind of stability begins forming. Not forced positivity, not emotional numbness. Something quieter. A grounded inner stillness that doesn't disappear every time life moves unexpectedly. This is where real inner power starts emerging. Not the power to control every outcome, but the power to remain internally centered while outcomes continue rearranging themselves. And ironically, this is often the moment visible reality finally begins shifting in noticeable ways. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped interrupting the process with constant emotional contradiction. People suddenly call. Opportunities appear unexpectedly. New ideas arrive seemingly from nowhere. Connections form naturally. Timing starts feeling almost unnatural in its precision. But by then, something even more important has already changed. Your emotional dependence on those outcomes has weakened. You no longer need the manifestation to prove your worth because your identity is no longer built entirely around external confirmation. And this is the hidden paradox most people never understand. The moment you stop desperately needing reality to change, reality finally has space to change. Because desperation is attachment to absence. It continuously broadcasts the emotional experience of not having. But grounded certainty carries a completely different frequency. It moves without force. It trusts without constantly checking. It allows without chasing. And eventually the nervous system learns something it was never taught before. Uncertainty is not danger. Delay is not punishment. Silence is not rejection. The unknown is not automatically loss. This is when the old emotional architecture finally begins collapsing for real. Not through violence. Not through force. Through disuse. Old reactions weaken because you stop feeding them attention. Old fears fade because you stop rehearsing them daily. Old identities dissolve because you stop emotionally introducing yourself to life through them. And over time, the version of you that once felt impossible starts becoming strangely natural. You speak differently, walk differently, breathe differently. Even time feels different because your body is no longer constantly trapped in survival anticipation. This is what most people are actually searching for beneath money, relationships, success, and achievement. Not the thing itself, but the emotional freedom they believe the thing will finally give them. But freedom was never hidden inside the manifestation. Freedom begins the moment your inner state stops being chained to visible evidence. And once that happens, life no longer feels like something you must constantly fight to control. It starts feeling like something responding intelligently to the person you are becoming. And maybe the deepest part of this entire journey has nothing to do with techniques at all. Not affirmations, not visualization, not morning routines. Maybe the deepest part has always been identity. Because underneath every emotional pattern, every repeated reaction, every fear you keep carrying into the future, there is a version of you silently deciding what feels possible and what does not. Most people think identity is something simple. A personality, a job title, a list of preferences. But identity is much deeper than that. Identity is the invisible architecture beneath perception itself. It's the emotional blueprint your nervous system uses to interpret reality before your conscious mind even has time to think. It's the reason two people can walk through the exact same experience and leave with completely different meanings. One person experiences rejection and decides they are unlovable. Another experiences rejection and becomes stronger, clearer, more connected to themselves. The event was the same. The identity interpreting it was different. And once you begin seeing this clearly, you realize how much of your life has been unconsciously organized around protecting an old identity you no longer want to carry. Maybe the identity of someone who always struggles. Someone who almost succeeds but never fully arrives. Someone who gives more than they receive. Someone who expects abandonment before love has the chance to settle inside the body. These identities rarely announce themselves directly. They whisper through patterns, through emotional habits, through the stories you automatically repeat when nobody is around. And because they feel familiar, the mind keeps treating them as truth. But an old identity does not survive because it is correct. It survives because it is rehearsed. Repetition creates emotional gravity. The body memorizes ways of being the same way muscles memorize movement. Which means many of the emotions you call yourself are simply emotional memorization happening automatically beneath awareness. This is why changing your life often feels like grieving a version of yourself that once kept you emotionally safe, even if that version created suffering. Because the familiar nervous system would rather stay inside predictable pain than walk into unfamiliar freedom. The unknown feels dangerous to the survival mind, even when the unknown contains everything you've been asking for. And this is why so many people sabotage themselves the moment life finally begins opening. They pray for intimacy, then panic when someone gets too close. They ask for abundance, then feel guilty the moment they begin receiving more than they're used to. They say they want peace, then unconsciously create chaos because chaos feels emotionally familiar. The nervous system keeps pulling reality back toward the identity it recognizes. Not because life is cruel, but because the body is trying to remain emotionally consistent with what it has practiced the longest. And this is where real awakening becomes uncomfortable in a way most people never expect. Because once you begin seeing your old identity clearly, you can no longer fully believe its stories the way you once did. You begin catching the old reactions in real time. The tightening in your chest when someone takes too long to reply. The collapse in your stomach when money feels uncertain. The immediate assumption that silence means rejection. And suddenly there's a strange split inside you. One part of you still reacting automatically, another part quietly watching the reaction happen. This is the birth of awareness. Not becoming perfect overnight. Becoming conscious enough to witness the pattern without immediately becoming the pattern. And at first, this witnessing can feel almost painful because you realize how often you abandoned yourself emotionally without even noticing. How many years you spent asking the visible world to decide whether you were safe, worthy, lovable, chosen, enough. But this awareness is not punishment. It's freedom beginning to wake up inside the nervous system. Because the moment a pattern can be observed consciously, it is no longer completely unconscious. And once something is no longer unconscious, it can begin changing. Slowly, gently, repeatedly, not through force, through awareness. Most people try to heal themselves through resistance. They fight their fear, fight their sadness, fight their insecurity. But whatever you fight, you continue feeding with attention. The deeper shift happens when you stop identifying with every emotion passing through you. You stop saying, "This is who I am," and begin realizing, "This is something I learned to feel." And learned patterns can be unlearned. Not instantly, but consistently. Every time you refuse to emotionally collapse in front of old evidence, a new identity strengthens a little more. Every time you choose presence instead of panic, the nervous system records a new memory. Every time you remain internally grounded while uncertainty moves around you, the body slowly learns that survival no longer requires fear. And eventually, something extraordinary begins happening. Situations that once destroyed your peace no longer hold the same emotional power. Delays stop feeling personal. Rejection stops defining your worth. Silence stops sounding like abandonment. You still feel emotions, but you no longer drown inside them. There's space now. Awareness between the trigger and the reaction. And in that space, your entire future quietly changes direction. Because your life does not transform through one giant moment of revelation. It transforms through thousands of tiny moments where you stop choosing the old self again and again and again. Tiny moments where you stop letting appearances dictate identity. Tiny moments where you stop asking reality who you are. And the beautiful thing is that reality eventually has no choice but to reflect the identity you consistently embody. Not immediately, not always dramatically, but inevitably. Because reality is always organizing itself around the emotional assumptions you return to most often. This is why the outer world often changes after the inner shift already feels normal. By the time visible evidence appears, the new version of you has usually already existed internally for a while. The relationship arrives after you stop feeling emotionally abandoned inside yourself. The abundance stabilizes after your nervous system stops associating money with fear. The opportunities appear after you stop seeing yourself as someone who must constantly struggle for worthiness. The visible world catches up to identity, never the other way around. And maybe this is why so many spiritual teachings say the kingdom is within. Not as metaphor, as instruction. The life you keep searching for externally can only stabilize once it exists internally first. And once you truly understand that, the urgency begins disappearing. You stop chasing manifestations with desperation because you realize the deeper work was never about forcing reality to change faster. It was about becoming the version of yourself who no longer needs visible proof in order to remain connected to truth. This is where a profound kind of peace finally begins entering the body. Not because every problem disappears overnight, but because you stop treating temporary appearances as permanent definitions of who you are. The bill on the table no longer feels like destiny. The silence in the room no longer feels like abandonment. The uncertainty ahead no longer feels like punishment. You begin understanding something most people spend their whole lives missing. Reality is not the authority over your identity. It is the reflection of it. And reflections always move after the source moves first. So maybe you were never behind. Maybe life was never withholding from you. Maybe reality has simply been waiting for your inner state to become clear enough, steady enough, coherent enough to hold the life that was trying to reach you all along. And maybe the moment you stop asking the visible world for permission to believe in yourself is the exact moment your entire future quietly begins changing beneath the surface. So if something inside you shifted while listening to this, even slightly, don't ignore that feeling. Because maybe this wasn't just another video you happened to click on during a restless night. Maybe this was a quiet reminder arriving at the exact moment your old identity was finally beginning to loosen its grip. And if you've stayed with me all the way to this point, then some part of you already knows the truth we've been circling around this entire time. Reality was never the source. It was always the reflection. The visible world was never the authority over your life. It was only echoing the state you kept returning to internally, again and again, often without even realizing it. And maybe now, for the first time in a long time, you can feel the difference between reacting to life and consciously choosing who you become inside of it. So before you leave, I want you to do something simple, not for the algorithm, not as a performance, but as a quiet decision made within yourself. In the comments below, write, "I stop asking reality for permission." Let those words become more than a sentence. Let them become a new internal direction. And if this message resonated with something deeper inside you, subscribe and stay close to this space. Because this journey is not about escaping the world. It's about finally remembering the part of yourself that existed before the world taught you to doubt it. The same voice, the same fire, and maybe the beginning of an entirely different life unfolding beneath the surface already. And if a part of you has been quietly searching for deeper truth, for peace beyond overthinking, for a way to stop letting the visible world control your inner state, then subscribe and stay close to this space. Because these videos are not made for distraction. They're made for the version of you that is beginning to wake up beneath the noise. Every week we go deeper into consciousness, manifestation, identity, awareness, and the hidden patterns shaping reality from within. So if you're ready to stop reacting to life and start understanding the deeper laws behind it, subscribe now and become part of this journey with us. The same voice, the same fire, the same awakening happening one layer at a time.